I've already done a brief recap of the Sage's abilities, and I've also looked into the healer meta, compared it to the Scholar, and finessed out a ton more details on a bunch of other Sage videos. But you know what? It is time to get absolutely down and dirty, and we're getting absolutely filthy with an in-depth look at the Sage unapologetically, because to be honest, I'm beyond hyped, and I'm just letting the madness seep in at this point. This is a very long video, and likewise I have provided timestamps that are quite thorough. I did ask the community, and honestly, y'all gave me the feedback, and the gloves are off, and so I'm not holding back on this one at all. So totally make use of the timestamps, leave, come back to the video whenever. I get it that this kind of video isn't a one-sitting deal. This has been like a week of like editing, researching, making sure that things are right and such. So this isn't just a skill review. As I said, we are really getting down and dirty, absolutely filthy with the Sage. Oh my. In terms of the contents, we're going to have 5 primary sections. The first one's going to be mechanics in-depth analysis, going over Cardia, Serpent Skull, Serpent Sting, ability augmentation. The second one is abilities, DPS abilities and healing abilities and role actions. Third one is potential openers and rotations. I put it in quotes because we don't have the exact potency numbers until like 3 weeks from now, in which case I'm going to edit this video, post it up with all the new updated tooltips, all of that, and then we will have the guaranteed rotation, but this is the rotation based off of what we know right now today, and that is like what's going to be broken down into single target and quote-unquote AoE, although saying rotation for dungeons is really weird because it's sometimes really hard to like determine when is exactly that going to happen. Fourth topic is going to be a general healing approach, and we're going to be really breaking down healing for the Sage into 6 different categories in this fourth category. So we're going to have background healing, Cardia, raw damage mitigation, off GCD healing, barriers, on GCD healing, and a wrap up of it. And then lastly, I'm going to end this with a section that is more like personal, more flavorful, which is like takeaways and thoughts of the Sage. And I'm kind of concerned, but I'm also extremely happy for the Sage. So first off is the Sage's mechanics. The Sage is broken down into 4 core mechanics. Technically, I'd say 3, but I am throwing in ability augmentation for good measure. First up is going to be Cardia, and Cardia is a brand new mechanic to Final Fantasy XIV with the addition of the new healer job Sage, and it is honestly having me and many other people extremely excited for the Sage. It is literally turning your damage into healing, which is absolutely badass, but beyond the badassery, that is making it so that you are getting healing and damage. It's just a very, very, very efficient kind of system. Likewise, for me, and I know many other people, this involves our favorite pastime of smashing faces as a healer. But here's where I need to say, and I know that this is like really quick into the video, but I need to say it, buyer beware. Before you jump onto the hype train about this skill and the Sage, this Cardia mechanic might make the Sage the absolute worst healer to pick for you if you aren't comfortable or you don't want to be doing a lot of damage. I know that a lot of people subscribe to the mentality, if I play a healer to heal, the Sage, run away from it as fast as you can. Turn your back, put on your Nikes, and start running. Like any other healer, you can get away with that in most forms of content outside of Savage and Ultimate raids, but the Sage, oh no, you will be punished. Run. Now let's get more into the details of the Cardia mechanic. So the Cardia mechanic allows the Sage to designate one party member as the Cardia target. This party member will get a 170 potency heal every time you do a damaging attack. And this includes every single attack in the Sage's entire kit that does any kind of damage will trigger this 170 potency heal on the Cardia target. This healing can be boosted using SOTERIA off of the GCD that can boost this from 170 potency per attack to 340 potency per attack. While this might seem off the wall insane, it is going to be absolutely powerful, don't get me wrong. The Cardia system isn't going to suddenly make every other healer invalid. When you look at it very honestly, Cardia is simply the Sage's version of the Scholar's Fairy, or similar to the White Mage or Astrologian's Regen effect. Cardia, however, is extremely unique in spite of this. It is a persistent effect that you don't need to refresh in combat, which makes it similar to the Scholar's Fairy, and unlike White Mage and Astro Regen that requires a global cooldown cast and constant refreshes, which as you could imagine would force you to stop casting damaging spells to reapply that on the GCD, it's very different. But how to say it? It's more significant than you might first suspect. If you pull up top speed kill rankings involving the White Mages, that indicates strongly that regen was cast on average 1 time during that entire fight, and an average HP per second contribution was an abysmally low 132 HPS, which is horrible. You can see it on the screen right now. Compare 132 to the other numbers, that's bad. Now contrast this to the Scholar with the Fairy pet that is going to be consistently throwing out Embrace passively, not costing GCD casts, and that had an average of 72 Embrace casts that averaged at 1.2k HP per second, but the maximum HP per second was a mind-blowing 2k HPS. EOS was definitely not living rent-free for that scholar. But note that that was just from Embrace. So to say the least, raiders, especially high-end raiders, want to be casting heals on the GCD as little as possible, making regen a little bit of a, I want to stay away from that. But I feel like we've really talked enough about passive and the power of that. Now let's talk about control. And control is where the Scholar's Fairy casts Embrace, which is something that has been a significant pain point of my own and many other Scholars and Shadowbringers, where no longer can we just use a Fairy macro to aim the Embrace casts. However, this isn't a problem for White Mages or Astra because they can choose their target for regen and the regen's just going to keep ticking on that particular target. The problem with that though is that it can lead to a ton of overhealing if not timed out properly, which will be essentially a wasted cast that you might have wanted to be more flexible and change targets, like what the Scholar's Fairy does actually do on its own, which is extremely powerful and will still be powerful in Endwalker. So with that out of the way, we can really say Cardia is the best of both worlds. Cardia is giving you a deep level of control to decide exactly where its healing is going rather than potentially doing minor chip damage healing on a DPS you're not worried about, or aimlessly funneling overhealing onto a full health tank. Also, since all attacks are 1.5 second cast time, as we're going to really deep dive later in the video, and Cardia is an off GCD ability with a short cooldown of 5 seconds or 2 GCDs, an Adept Sage will be able to very easily weave Cardia targets while getting damage off. If you're like familiar with the Ast's card system with putting cards on targets, shuffling it, you're gonna be basically doing the same kind of idea with Cardia management. So what we're really looking at here, persistent effect with tons of control, which makes me personally a huge fan of the Cardia system. Some people have been like, oh, maybe you're hyping it up too much, but I think that while it's not going to completely replace the healing toolkit, a very well played Sage will definitely maximize and milk the heck out of this. Like, that granular level of control while also being a persistent effect is exceedingly powerful. It's brilliant. It's like, it reminds me of old Fairy back in the day, which was very, very, very powerful. There's a reason why whenever you look up like any healer forums, so many people were saying that the Scholar was OP. It really, when you know how to use things properly, can be very strong. The Sage is definitely giving you that level. Now here is where we really get into the flip of it, where we need to kind of be honest with one another and say that this skill's apparent simplicity when you read it is deceptive. It can be very effective, no doubt, when you just apply it to main tank. Just apply it and forget about it. But the trick is in the details. I'm not trying to say the D is in the details. You know what I mean. Like the the details is where things get really sinister here. We're manipulating Cardia. Where it's placed on who on the party is going to really distinguish the best of the best players. And I think with the Sage, more than any other healer, we are going to see a staggeringly large difference between the floor and the ceiling. The ceiling is very high for the Sage, but the floor is very low for the Sage. Like, take a Scholar's Fairy. The Scholar does not need to change the Fairy's target actively, but as a Sage, in order to maximize what Cardia is doing, you need to be changing targets. This quickly gets into the next wall of Cardia system, which does assume 100% that you are going to be using your DPS skills a lot, and that may pose itself as a challenge to players who aren't as comfortable, making the Cardia system essentially a complete waste. At that point, it's like, why are you even playing the Sage? So let's pull up some top ranking numbers for the Scholars and White Mage, and we can see that White Mages are casting a total of 147.7 on GCD damage spells, and Scholars are casting on average 163.5 on GCD damage spells. And those casts are multiplied by 170 potency Cardia, if they were Sage skills, that is. To future-proof this video though, I will say that Scholar and White Mages need to explicitly weave in off GCD abilities, so they need to stop casting Glare and Broil in order to weave in their OGCDs. And in the future, as we do already know, all healers are having their basic spammable ability on a 1.5 second cast time, allowing a steady, constant weave like Astrologian does today. It's very likely that we will see an uptick of on GCD damage spell usage from this change, and like really the takeaway for this entire section is Cardia is like the core mechanic of the Sage. So this is probably the most unique defining factor of the Sage. But while it is incredibly super powerful, it is a buyer beware system. If you pick the Sage, be ready to DPS heavily or be open to learning the how to. It might be intimidating at first, but as I've always said on this channel, and I will constantly be saying, like, you're on a guide video right now. You think that I'm trying to lord myself above you? No, I'm trying to make it so that everyone is like hyped up for the Sage, that everyone's just like, yeah, I want to pick up the Sage, I know what I'm getting into, and I'm going to practice. That's why I'm here. Just honestly do your best. Heaven knows that I'm going to cause some brutal wipes myself in Endwalker with the Sage. I'm not too proud to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to deny that. There will be many, many deaths because of my BS. I mean, learning with Cardia. So just give it a shot, do your best, and likewise, if you're even listening to this, like, you're obviously like putting in the effort and trying, so I would not worry. If you're listening to this, don't worry about it. So the next mechanics I'm going to be talking about is Serpent's Gall and Serpent's Sting, and I want to take a very quick moment here and explain the Serpent and medicine lore because it might help a lot of people wrap their head around this overarching mechanic. I know it did for me at least. So a few days ago, I did a deep dive into explaining every aspect of the Sage's kit and its relation to Greek mythology and Greek medicine. So we're literally getting Greek goddesses like Soteria, we're getting Icarus, we're the legend. We are, however, going to be doing like a diet version here just to help understanding. So in medicine, there is commonly used a symbol involving snakes, and so the snake was commonly tied to medicine, which the Sage lore and inspiration really draws a ton from. But for snakes, there's this division between the poison, the bite, the so-called sting, and then the gall, which is short for gallbladder, that is an organ that secretes bile and in various circles is considered a therapeutic healing ingredient. Don't take that as medical advice though, guys. I do not know a single thing about specifically how that is used, so definitely not medical advice. The last thing I'd do is like try that. Don't try this at home. But what I'm trying to really get at is the Sage as a healer that revolves around dealing a crap ton of DPS, as we just fleshed out in the Cardia section, is still a healer. It's got both the elements of the Serpent, the healing gallbladder, and the vicious sting to harm its foes. But this might lead to the point where people are confused. They're like, gallbladders, what the hell? So this has a lot to do into like the deeper Greek lore about talking about the four humors in Greek medicine, where it was considered essential to have the right combination of the four humors. And by humor, I'm not meaning a joke. It is referring to the fluids in the body that I should disclaimer before someone memes me in the comments section. I've seen the comments, guys. I really do read them and I'm like, oh my god. But for the sake of the core mechanics of the Sage, we have the Serpent's Gall that is all about healing by expending the Serpent's Gall charges on skills ending with the suffix col. Not cholefix. Like coal, like cholesterol, and these are going to be bile skills. They're related to the gall, the gallbladder, the yellow bile, healing. And then on the other hand, we have this expending the Serpent's Sting to cause harm through toxins, meaning damaging abilities like TOXICON. Now with the understanding out of the way, let's dive into the actual mechanics of Serpent's Gall in 14 though. And so this is going to be a special resource that you expend for powerful healing tools. There are going to be 3 gemstones at the top of the Sage's gauge that recover at a rate of 1 Serpent's Gall per 20 seconds as indicated in the middle blue bar. And people like overcomplicate the middle blue bar, like I've seen the comments. No guys, it simply shows you the time left to get another Serpent's Gall. It's very visual. It is like, hey, you're like halfway from your next one, and the Sage is like, crap, I really need that right now, and the bar's like, haha, no, I'm still halfway there. I'll still take this over Aether Flow any single day of the week. An important, interesting note about Serpent's Gall is that they do recover outside of combat, which allows you to have them as options immediately, so don't feel helpless on getting the charges beforehand. Like, a lot of people compare this to the White Mage's system, which is true to a degree, but it's also like the Scholar's Aether Flow system. The difference is that the Scholar does like a double weave of like Aether Flow, and you get what I mean. Now let's talk about the spenders. So you're going to spend 1 charge of Serpent's Gall to use on one of 4 special abilities that cost Serpent's Gall. These abilities end with the suffix col, which is referring to bile or gall. Serpent's Gall for the gallbladder. Have mercy on me for these names, please. Dora Okore Col is going to be a handy emergency heal that can be weaved off of the global cooldown to heal a single target for 600 potency. For all intents and purposes, this is the Scholar's Lustrate ability, which we already know today is a very powerful emergency tool. Kira Kore Chole is an extremely powerful ability where we are applying 2 buffs to allies. The first one is going to be a 10% damage mitigation, which in and of itself is very powerful. But we're also going to be applying a light heal over time trickle. This is going to add up to a total of 500 potency of healing, and when it's in an AoE, because it's basically like Sacred Soil, so we already know that, it's just going to be a very, very powerful effect with that heal, with that mitigation. So just to be clear, like, this is also exactly a 1-to-1 replica of the Scholar ability Sacred Soil. Tank pulled big, use this. raid-wide damage coming in, apply this right before the damage comes in, meaning that it's an extremely flexible and powerful ability that many people can likely justify using off of cooldown in some form. Eucrasia Simplified is going to be a simple burst of 400 HP to the party. It is going to be a very handy tool for recovering party health in a big burst, especially in an emergency situation. And if anyone is noticing a pattern yet, yes, this is a direct equivalent to Scholar's in-dom heal, which to say the least has proven itself to be extremely useful to say the least in raid-wide healing. I remember when Indom first came out that people were like, this is broken and this is busted Scholar's OP, it needs a nerf. And Sage is getting it, so take from that what you will. Now we're at Tarokole, and this is extremely similar to Dorokore, which is going to have an additional 10% damage mitigation tied to it that lasts 15 seconds, and this ability, this Tarokole, is going to be on a 45-second cooldown timer. Smacked onto it really kind of to prevent spamming it, just because that mitigation with the heal is so strong. And this is going to be the one ability that seems unique compared to the Scholar and seems to stand on its own. On-demand mitigation is so beautiful, honestly. I think that Yoshi P heard my dreams and made this a reality, and I love this ability. This is going to help through experts, this is going to help tank busters. Love this ability. The one thing that I should mention in this video, just because it is an ultimate guide where we're going in depth, is that you can't stack Tarakole's 10% mitigation with the 10% mitigation from a Kitsukore Kole, one or the other. But this is going to be where you get a fascinating interaction that you bet that I'm going to be using. So Kira Kole is going to last 15 seconds and is a 10% mitigation, 30-second cooldown. That's like the Sacred Soil equivalent. Tarakole is going to last 15 seconds and has a 10% mitigation to it, 45-second cooldown. So in the absolutely warped world that I have lived in too many times where tanks don't use cooldowns at all ever, this lets me place down a Kirakole Kole like that, and then chain Tarakole on there, and then use the Kirakole again. Sorry guys, these names are rough on me. But the point is that we have the ability to layer on the mitigation. The first one, second one, third one, and then after that, like, the cycle can rinse and repeat. It's really good. Also, to like spoil things ahead of time, we also have the ability PNEUMA, and so we really get to layer on constant mitigation, which is so good. And so that's the wrap up for the Serpent's Gall gauge and abilities. And that means that it is time to talk about the Serpent's Sting. And this is similar to the Serpent's Gall in that it can cap out at 3 charges. Charges, however, are not acquired outside of combat. Charges are going to be acquired when you have a shielded target to take damage to the point that it breaks the shield. Think of something like in the current game for the Dark Knight needs their Blackest Night shield to be smashed to get a special proc. Really, we're rewarding proper shield usage here. Spamming the shield, what's that gonna do? Okay, I'm gonna spam my shield a bunch of times, get a whole bunch of charges, then blow the charges. That's too easy. But this smashing of the shield will give you a Serpent Sting charge. Think about it like, you hurt my friend, now you will die, At present, we have only one ability confirmed, which is TOXICON, that is going to deal a decent amount of damage in an AoE, but this ability has left me and many others, as I've spoken about at length in a past video about the Sage, really raising an eyebrow, wondering like, where's the single target potency? But because Toxicon's single target potency is only going to be 330, which is the same as DOSIS, our single target spammable at 330 potency. And so really diving into this, because it is an interesting point of conversation, and I'm giving you like the diet version here of that other video, Toxicon is still on the GCD from the tooltips. How to say it? The particular advantage of Toxicon seems to be explicitly that it is instant cast, meaning that you can use it while doing very large movements or mechanics. Remember that 1.5 seconds cast time of DOSIS gives you a lot of mobility. So like we're talking like you need to be like booking it and don't have the time to like move. Or alternatively, DOSIS only allows like a single weave comfortably, otherwise you're going to be clipping the GCD heavily if you try and weave 2 skills in that 1 second window. So this allows you to do a double weave. At the end of the day, this doesn't remain a satisfying answer, and so the verdict is that this is an area of effect spender for Serpent Sting Gauge, and that we're going to get an alternative ability that wasn't on Yoshi P's hotbars that's going to be a single target spender, which was really, to many people including myself, really confirmed why in the CGI trailer as well as in the Endwalker benchmark trailer we can see that there's a floating Newlith ability that's spinning around a target, and it's just like if you're spending money on the CGI, like it's so important it's actually like represented somehow, because like CGI is expensive, guys, like damn. But anyhow, that is the long explanation for this. In like 3 weeks time, when we get the complete embargo lifted and all of the details of the Sage, I am going to be updating this section for sure. But I am going to cap this section off by saying something that the developers likely have fully intended for you to build up this Serpent's sting gauge with all 3 charges and then wait for a 60-second raid buff window and then explode on the enemy with all 3 charges that you're going to be buffed in that raid buff window for tremendously huge damage. During the live letter, they were like, we have 120 seconds, 60-second interval, 120, 60-second interval. Like, the developers are definitely playing into that, and I can definitely see this Serpent sting mechanic for a brand new job, the Sage, playing right into that mentality. Now, the final mechanic that we're talking about is Eucrasia, which is going to be the Sage's augmentation system button. Recall from earlier in the video when we were talking about the lore, Eucrasia is actually going to be a quote-unquote healthy balance of the 4 humors in Greek lore. And so Eucrasia and the augmentation system is actually a lot more simple than people have been really posting and speculating on and discussing. It is really just a 1-second cast time ability that augments 3 different abilities, only 3. I will note, interestingly though, that these augmented abilities have a reduced recast timer to 1.5 seconds and are instant cast. The instant cast is a huge perk, as is the reduced timer, to ensure that it doesn't extend over the 2.5 second baseline GCD, so you're still hitting that 2.5 second baseline GCD. But the 3 abilities that can be changed is Diagnosis, which is turning the standard single target heal Diagnosis to Eucrasia Diagnosis, which is a heal plus barrier on a single target. Prognosis is the next skill, which is going to turn the Prognosis basic AoE heal into Eucrasia Prognosis, which is an AoE heal plus barrier. So really for those 2, think like Diagnosis is like Scholar's Adlo. For Prognosis, think of it like Scholar's Succor, or I'm supposed to call it Sucker. That sounds so wrong to me, saying Sucker, but I've read the comments, guys. Oh, Sucker. God, am I the Sucker? Oh no. I did feel like the Sucker when I was spamming that and I just needed the healing, and I'm like, I don't have any heals. So I kept wasting the shield. But getting back to the video, the 3rd ability is DOSIS, which is turning the basic single target spammable attack DOSIS into Eucrasia DOSIS, which is a single target damage over time effect. Or I want to cap off this section by saying Eucrasia what it does in simple terms. I put a shield on my basic heals and I make my single target basic spam ability a damage over time effect. And that's it. If I'm gonna be super honest here, I really do view it as a way to reduce button bloat on the Sage, because it's like you have a single hotkey to change these 3 keys, and so instead of 6 keys, now you have 4 keys. Maybe kind of like the old Dark Knights for Dark Knight, kind of, sort of, maybe, not really, I guess. But my point is, like, Eucrasia is really that simple. I put a shield on my basic heals and make my single target spammable a damage over time effect. It's not more complicated than that. So now we've hit the point of the video where it's time to get into the abilities breakdown, and I'm gonna try and cover them a lot more detail and their potential use cases than I did in the overview video as I go through them. So definitely a bit more of a deep dive. So we're going to be starting off this section with the DPS abilities. DOSIS is going to be your single target spammable ability. It's going to be doing upfront 330 potency of damage on a 1.5 second cast time. 1.5 seconds cast time with a 2.5 second GCD means that you have 1 second to weave in anything between the end of the cast time and then the start of the next GCD. And I can't emphasize how important this is, guys. Like, if you want to get really comfortable with this, play Ast now. Play Ast today. And this is going to be something that, like, actually for any healer, but especially for the Sage, because you need to be DPSing constantly, is going to be essential to get down right, because you have a short bit of time to move, which is extremely powerful. You can also combine those with slide casting if you really wanted, and then you can weave in any of the powerful off global cooldown abilities as well in this window. You can even do both movement and that at once if you're like control over your character is that good. That's why I really say practice, 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 because if you can do that, that's going to be a huge benefit. But the main thing is that this opens up a lot of flexibility for the Sage, and since you have the Cardia mechanic that will heal an ally for using a damaging ability, I cannot emphasize how important this is, as well as I warned in the Cardia section, if you are like needing to heal a different target, like instead the main tank is fine, you want to instead heal the chip damage off a DPS, consider Cardia weaving, and you're still doing the DPS because of this window. If that sounded like too much to you, which it shouldn't, just give it a bit of time, just give it a bit of practice though, but this is going to really make the difference between a Sage that is really doing stupid well and hitting that ceiling, or a Sage that unfortunately falls down to the low level of the floor with the Sage, and maybe a different healer option would be better. Not elitist to say. If you don't want to do damage spells, there is nothing wrong with that in most forms of content. Like Savage's Ultimate's a different story, but if you're just playing casually, that's fine, nothing wrong with that, but you want to probably consider different healing options. One thing I do want to stress on again is that this is the exact same timing as Astrologian in the game, current game right now that's live on servers. And if you want to practice and get used to this mechanic, which I will strongly support and endorse a lot, then get on Astro in-game with Malefic and try weaving, slide casting, really start getting comfy. Then to really wrap up our talk on Dosis is that as a Sage, this is going to be the most cast ability that you have, far more than any other spell. Even looking at the current Savage Fight data, you can see Scholar White Mage have an overwhelming majority of their casts in their equivalent of Dosis, which is Glare and Broil. So definitely get extremely comfortable with this idea if you want to play Sage. Next up is going to be Eucrasia Dosis, and every single healer in this game has had a 30-second damage over time effect, and this is not changing in Endwalker it seems, and this is going to be the one for the Sage. As we just talked about in the augmentation section, there is really nothing special about this versus any other damage over time effect in the game for healers. I mean, White Mages applies like an upfront 120 potency, but at the end of the day, potato. I mean, White Mages are currently using that sometimes to weave, but you know what I mean. So simply you hit Eucrasia and then hit Dosis and bam, this is applied instantly. And so one thing to note, however, is that you should maintain 100% uptime on this dot. Pulling up White Mage and Scholar top ranking Raider information again, the damage over time effects made a significant chunk of their damage. Do not ignore this. And I should make this super clear, especially in an ultimate guide video, is that 170 potency heal from Cardia is coming from any damage spell cast, including the initial cast of Eucrasia Dosis. Cardia isn't going to be ticking off of the damage portion, the damage over time portion of Eucrasia Dosis, only the initial cast. That would be bonkers. Could you imagine you're getting a 170 potency heal every time you cast a spell on top of like every 3 seconds of the dot ticking? That would be bonkers. Please don't make that happen, because I know that the nerf bat would come swinging so hard. But one last note on this ability that I just want to say is that this is going to be very, very important, because 30 seconds cast time means that 2 times 30 is obviously 60. Everyone in the watching this video went, wow, basic multiplication. But why that's important is because raid buff windows are going to be 60 and 120 second windows. This means every 2 casts, or 1 refresh after the initial cast, is going to be 60-second windows. It's going to be like 2 casts, 60 seconds, raid window. Pop your cooldowns. This is like your built-in internal timer on like, okay, I know when the raid buffs window is coming. It's coming up in 15 seconds. Bam. Now the third ability I'm going to talk about is DYSCRASIA, which I don't have much to speak on. It is really just a basic AoE spammable ability. It's instant cast, it hits 5 meters around yourself, so it's like around you. You're like this point of center of the circle of the AoE. It's a direct 170 potency. It is literally Scholar's Art of War for all intents and purposes. To remember it better, maybe recall that DYSCRASIA is when the 4 humors aren't in balance in the Greek medical lore. You're messing up their humors in AoE. I really don't have much more to say about DYSCRASIA. It'll make up the majority of your casts in a large AoE pull dungeon. Unlike DYSCRASIA, this is now where we start to go off the rails and the Sage starts to go off into the deep end compared to the other healers that we have, where the Sage has far more DPS abilities. So PHLEGMA is going to be an on global cooldown, note on GCD because it is a spell, and it's going to be a damaging spell that does 510 potency to a single target and 50% less for AoE. So that's going to be what? 255. Really should script my videos, darn it. The large thing is that is a metric ton of damage. What's also more interesting is that this also comes with 2 charges, and the charges come back at 45-second intervals. So like with any charge ability, I'm thinking like Gauss Round and Ricochet with the Machinist, you are losing value when you don't have a charge ticking back up on cooldown. You can have 1 charge in your inventory, but make sure that that second one is still on cooldown, ticking back up. Undeniably, one of the first things that you do in a combat opener is going to be a cast of PHLEGMA, if not the first because it is on the GCD. But mind you, are you really losing that much when you're waiting 5 seconds more just for the raid buff window to open because it takes a little bit of time to do that? Not really, but my point is, I would theorize, I need to crunch the numbers more, but I'd theorize that this would probably be your 3rd or 4th GCD cast if you want to really line up with the raid buff window. God, I'm like slurring over my words. I'm having a hard time with English right now. I'm sorry, guys. But I'm thinking, generally speaking, PHLEGMA is going to be like your 4th and 5th GCD casts during the raid buff window during your opener. Generally speaking, if you don't have like a dancer buff, who cares? One very notable super weird thing about PHLEGMA is really that it has a range of 6 yards. Likewise, you can see the Sage go right up to the target and then bam, huge AoE circle. PHLEGMA. So you really need to get up close and personal, and you should always be thinking about this at the start of a raid buff window. Maybe you're weaving in Icarus and like going right up and personal to like the boss and then doing that during your opener, and so you do need to get a little bit intimate with the Sage during key buff windows. Mind you, it's pretty standard for a healer to be like at the center just so that you can heal the entire party with an AoE anyhow, so there's that. The next ability is TOXICON that we've already spoke about in excess during the Serpent Sting mechanic. It's going to be a Serpent Sting spender. It's going to deal 330 potency upfront to a single target. It's going to be dealing 50% less potency in an AoE. This brings us to PNEUMA, Monia. I've heard a few different enunciations of it, but this is going to be a bizarrely powerful ability that deals 330 potency damage to enemies and heals allies for 400 potency, and so it's really going to do the same amount as our burst AoE heal from Serpent's Gall mechanic. That is going to be very powerful. And then it also, on top of that, provides a powerful 10% mitigation for 20 seconds to all allies. And each of these effects is pretty good. 330 potency, same as DOSIS. 400 potency, same as that emergency burst heal that costs you a Serpent stack. And then 10% mitigation. This combination is bizarrely powerful. Oh yeah, and it does damage, so that also means it procs Cardia too, of course. So getting down and dirty with this ability, it is not doing more damage than DOSIS, so do I see this used in the opener? Absolutely no. Hell no, no. It's way too powerful of a cooldown for that, and especially since it's not doing more potency at all than it, keep it. Keep it for later. But now if we're talking like on the flip side about dungeons, like during a big tank pull, okay, that's a totally different story because this is AoE damage. But during like a standard raid boss like E12S, E8S, whatever, I would never use this in an opener. I'd save this for later. Way too powerful to do that. In fact, on the flip side, because it does damage as well as the healing, it is really saving you a cast of damage and adding damage later when you use it properly. Or multiple because that 10% mitigation. I'm sorry, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but you get what I'm saying. But from like a raid perspective, I see that the developers, when they made this skill and thought it up, they were really telling us from the tooltip, haha, cast this instead of DOSIS when things get rough. Don't worry, we will still give you the damage of DOSIS and the Cardia proc, so chill out, dude, and use this when you need a helping hand. Same cast time and recast as DOSIS, same damage, big healing, mitigation perk. Stupid strong, and for ability named the Greek word for breath or soul or like seed of life, I think it's quite fitting. And this is the kind of thing that you would bring up for like E12S terminal relativity or the 11S electric cycles. So freaking good. So that does it for the DPS skills of the Sage, and now it is time to talk about the healing skills. We're going to start off the section with the most basic heal, the Cure 1 equivalent, the Physic equivalent. It's called Diagnosis for the Sage, and know that 50 extra potency does not make me want to cast it more. Based off of current gameplay of healers with Cure 1 Physic, Benefic 1, these are almost never cast. These are like dead buttons some healers even tell to take off your hotbars. The Sage should absolutely not be casting this. I'm going to be talking about it a lot more in the healing section, but they should not be casting it unless they have truly no other option. Only time that you will really be hitting this button is during when you need a barrier, like a single target barrier, and then you're going to be using your Eucrasia, and then you're going to turn this into a shield, a single target shield plus that heal, Eucrasia Diagnosis. For all intents and purposes, that's the only time you really want to use this button. Same time as when a scholar really wants to use Ad Bloquium. But like just flat out basic Diagnosis, absolutely try and avoid this, especially with the Sage. Every single time you cast a damaging ability, that's 170 potency. So really think 450 minus 170, that's what, like 280? I'm doing this math in my head, I don't know. But 2 casts at 170 is going to be 340 potency, so it's just like, okay, just keep casting damage spells, kind of. Like, you might be put in a pinch to use this, but generally speaking, avoid. So next up is Prognosis, and very similar to Diagnosis, this is going to be a very basic ability that you generally want to avoid. But this is going to be the basic 300 potency spammable Medica 1, not 2, Medica 1 equivalent, or Helios equivalent for Ast. And this makes the scholar and me cry because we don't have anything like it, and oddly enough I've been put in the situation, the horrible situation, where I kind of wish I had this. Instead Sakura only has like that shield with the, or rather, has a like 220 potency heal, and then it has the shield on top of it or something like that. It really sucks to spam Sakura. Any scholars know this, and they're just like probably nodding going, oh, preach. So Unlike Diagnosis rather, this is an ability that I do see yourself casting a lot more, because Cardia, unless you're using HAIMA or PANHAIMA, more on that in a bit, is not going to impact any more than one target, so you are going to be spamming Prognosis sometimes. When things really hit the fan, you will probably end up using Prognosis. So like if you fall behind on raid-wide healing, you at least have this option here, and it is definitely valuable. More likely than not, especially with a co-healer, that's going to be White Mage or Ast in most cases, maybe a Scholar and Rare, but most likely a pure healer. This can be enhanced with Eucrasia to provide a barrier with the heal to the party, so think of it like a Scholar Succor equivalent from Scholar, Succor equivalent from Scholar. Yeah, generally speaking, I really stand by what I said. Avoid this whenever you can, but I do see this being cast far more than Diagnosis. On the flip side, I do think, especially for progression raiding, which is what like 95% of raiders are, like maybe 5% of raiders, this is a guesstimate, but like the incredible mass preponderance of raiders or progression raiders, you would probably want to cast Eucrasia Prognosis for the barrier just to have that extra breathing room and like a little bit more caution. But raw Prognosis now. Now we're getting into an ability section where you want to be casting these a lot whenever you really can. And so PHYSIS is going to be an off GCD ability, so that means you can weave it between casts of DOSIS or other spells without interfering with your GCD, which should be as much as possible on damaging abilities. I'm just going to say once for this ability, but anytime you see OGCD healed, that should be what you're thinking. Ah, this is making me more space so that I can keep DPSing. Perfect. I love OGCD heals. I do too. Yeah, we're best friends now. Yeah, I love OGCD heals. But for real, like this is an incredibly powerful effect that is a direct analog to Whispering Dawn we see today in Scholar's Kit make up an absolutely huge 2k healing per second on average at the top end of gameplay. Do not sleep on PHYSIS just because its effect reads off as weak on the tooltip. It is extremely strong when you let it do work. So what PHYSIS actually does is it applies a 21-second duration heal over time effect to allies that ticks 21 divided by 3 equals 7 multiplied by 100 equals 700. Get it? The math is absolutely riveting, guys. But 7 times at 100 potency is going to be 700 potency of healing, which is super good. The real strength of an ability like this, or any ability of this, is really the fact it's off the GCD and how versatile it is and how it can offset the amount of global cooldown cast that you'd need to spend on something like spamming Prognosis, which we know from we just talked about is quoted at 300 potency per GCD. And likewise, you are giving up your Cardia effect as well as contributing damage to the boss every time you do that. So any off GCD ability is really time to breathe. Let your heal over... Oh, actually I should say that. And I'm not going to say this for every heal over time effect, even though I kind of want to. But just because I don't see people do this in game. Let your heal over time effects tick on people. Don't just instantly burst them. It's just like I see so many white mages especially. They're like Medica 2 and then they're like Plenary Indulgence and then 2 Afflatus Raptors and then I'm like... There's like 12 seconds left of Medica 2. What? Also, the Scholar sometimes has Whispering Dawn there. I have totally never been in that situation to cast Whispering Dawn ever. Never, guys. Let your HOTS do their work. Unless you need to like prepare for like a successive AoE, in which case totally burst heal, but that's not that common. Even in Savage Raids, actually. You usually have like breathing room. Really getting used to this is how you use more damage spam abilities, and keep up proccing Cardia, and this mentality, super important as a Sage. PHYSIS is going to be one of your best friends as a Sage. Guarantee you, because it's exactly the same as Whispering Dawn, and Scholars love Whispering Dawn. So next up is Soteria, and it's a good thing that we talked about Cardia in depth, right? A little too much depth, whatever. But Soteria is going to boost the Cardia healing from 170 potency per damaging ability used to 340 per. So it's literally doubling it for 10 seconds on a reasonable 90-second cooldown timer. I actually think that this is going to be one of my most commonly used OGCD abilities. I love it. So since this too is an ability, so weavable off of the GCD, you can trigger it between DOSIS casts in preparation to heal off significant chunks of damage. 10 seconds divided by 2.5 seconds GCD is 4 casts of DOSIS. 4 casts of DOSIS at 340 potency healing is 1,360 healing to a single target. But as we kind of described in the Cardia section, if you really want to be saucy, you can even change Cardia targets and split this healing. But like, let's be for real, guys. Like, people might laugh at that and be like, oh, I'm gonna be saucy. But 340 potency is just barely under Diagnosis, which is at 450 potency. And I'm sure that this is making everyone exclaim, oh, this is why Cole said don't cast Diagnosis. Like, yeah, don't do that. This is a far better use of your GCD. Your party wants to break the enrage timer. So even though SOTERIA in lore is like the Greek deity of like salvation, safety, deliverance, and preservation from harm, all I can think is, yes, I get to blow up the enemy more. We go together. I love SOTERIA. So now we're talking about PEPSI, which the lore is of a fantastic drink that is a constant rival of Coca-Cola. And I joke, but it really actually means digestion metabolism, which I do think actually fits this skill. So this skill is an off GCD that will transform currently existing shields on allies into a significant burst of healing on a short 15-second cooldown. So you can really just apply a shield to allies and then burst their HP up. Basic, right? And sure, that is going to be a valid use case, and I'm always going to say that that's powerful. Double dip. But I mean, single dip is valid. Did I really spoil my own video? But my point is, just casting a shield and then immediately getting rid of it with PEPSI is really underestimating the power of the skill. PEPSI can be significantly more technical, just like how Cardia seems simple at the surface, and then you smack it on the tank and just be done with it. But as we explored before, it has a lot of wiggle room for technical mastery and use cases. Exact same thing on PEPSI. So note carefully on the PEPSI tooltip, this skill does not say that it heals for the amount of shield left on a target. I know bells are ringing already in your mind, and you are spot on. The best use of PEPSIS is actually to apply a shield to an ally, let that ally get a little bit roughed up, and just be like, yawn, boring, get smacked. But the shield, just at the very last moment before it goes away, pop PEPSIS. Bam. Now you've optimized your value. You've double dipped. You've gone that value after that shield twice, rather than just once. You let the shield itself act as a shield and get whacked. And then you turn the barely existing shield into a powerful heal, meaning that mastering this is going to be extremely technical and very, very valuable. PHYSIS 2 is another off GCD heal over time effect, but this time with a much shorter duration and a higher potency. It's going to be 200 potency over 15 seconds, so 5 ticks at a total of 1000 potency of healing. Exact same boat as PHYSIS 1, guys. I don't want to repeat everything that I said, but the PHYSIS 2 ability is just another amazing way to pull the most value out of your GCDs and has so much potential. This is so much better. Scholar has nothing like this. This is going to offload a lot of healing, as well as it gives you a healing amp, and like, oh my god, guys, PHYSIS 2 is like definitely something to like. Powerful. Nothing else to say that I haven't said 1,000 times before. Actually, I lied. I have one more thing to say. Since it's a 10% healing amplification, I'm like, one more thing. But because it's a healing amplification, guys, you can actually stack this to enhance your barriers by 10% too. So that is also another interesting effect. So if you're doing something where, say, your party's HP is a little too low because maybe people aren't like as geared out as you really want to be for like P4S or something like that, you can combine this with this, and maybe you can slink by the mechanic, but if it's that tight, but it's an option. Now this gets us into HOLISM, which is a direct equivalent to Scholar's Fey Blessing. It's a 300 potency heal burst that is cast off the GCD, and I've said it a few times now and I can't stress it enough. 300 potency is the same potency as Prognosis, and this should almost always be preferred. Objectively, you're getting the same heal as Prognosis and a 330 damage target, and so you're also at 170 potency healing from Cardia. Big perks. HOLISM. Don't underestimate it. Haha, it's the same as Prognosis, but with 330 damage, as then it's another 170 potency of healing. Oh, I love HOLISM. Now we're talking about HAIMA, which is going to be an ability that impacts a single target with a 200 potency upfront barrier, and then 5 stacks of the HAIMA buff that are going to be separate from the shield. Every damaging ability that you cast will reduce the 5 stacks of HAIMA, like 5 to 4 to 3, you get what I mean. But every time you cast a damaging ability, it's going to expend one of those stacks and restore 170 potency to heal this target. Obviously in addition to the Cardia target. So HAIMA and Cardia can stack for the record, so you can double dip. You can also cleave heal both tanks, for instance. Overall, it is a very attractive ability to give the Sage a leg up on managing incoming damage without sacrificing much damage uptime. Am I really going to say the OGCD thing? Can you say it enough times in an ultimate guide video? Use your OGCDs. I don't know if you can or can't. Use it. But like, think about something like both tanks are getting whacked on, like a Diamond Weapon Extreme. You're gonna cleave Cardia healing that you do through damage spells to keep up the tanks, and, or how to say it, you have Cardia main tank, put HAIMA on off tank, just keep doing damage, and this really lets you double dip on both as they take the cleave damage. Alternatively, during focus fire, you could put this and stack it with Cardia to heal even more to that ally. I'm getting slightly ahead of myself, but note that this does not also stack with PANHAIMA. You can stack Cardia and HAIMA, or Cardia and PANHAIMA, but you can not triple dip. So PANHAIMA and HAIMA do not stack. Now PANHAIMA is going to be the AoE version of HAIMA. This is going to let you get 5 stacks of HAIMA to your allies. Each damaging spell that you cast will cause one of these stacks to go away and heal all targets affected by this with 170 potency. Exact same thing as HAIMA, but AoE. Undeniably, this is going to be an absolutely fantastic ability to help the Sage further resolve the damage that the party has taken after the fact, but there is no reason to not double dip and cast it right before incoming damage for a slightly higher shield going to the damage spike. Similar to HAIMA, this PANHAIMA ability will not stack with HAIMA. So now we're at role actions, and I'm going to very quickly just go over the role actions for the Sage. There don't seem to really be any mind-blowing changes going into Endwalker, so I'm going to actually breeze over this pretty fast. So first up is Repose, and this allows you to cast Sleep on a target. This can be useful on, say, open world maps like Eureka or in solo content like Palace of the Dead, but generally speaking, Repose is not really a raid buff ability or something that you'd use in like an expert dungeon. I desperately wish that this was retooled into an interrupt, but it does have its uses in Eureka open world content. Second up is Lucid Dreaming, which is one of the most important cross-class skills for healers that should be cast as much as possible, and yes, absolutely, I do even mean when you're still high MP, and this is just in order to keep your MP levels very high, just because through the course of a fight you're expending a lot of MP, AoE heals especially very expensive, so I cannot emphasize enough just how vital it is to essentially keep this ability on cooldown. Very important, otherwise you're going to run into MP problems later, probably. Unless you're white mage, in which case you just don't care. Non-white mage plebeians do have to care though. SURECAST is going to be another critical ability that allows you a guarantee that your casts will all go off, which, okay, sure, SURECAST, that's fine and dandy. But what this is really important for is in Savage raiding, avoiding knockback mechanics to allow you to essentially cheese that mechanic and survive. So that makes it a very important skill. Now, ESUNA is our next ability, and it's going to be very powerful, and it isn't used as often as one might think, but when it does come in handy is to cleanse a debuff from an ally. It's useful things for like E8, as Shiva is going to sometimes have 2 dooms on 2 different targets. Sometimes poisons are cast that need to be cleansed on different fights. Point is, it is definitely a hotbar worthy skill. Next up is a vital skill to any healer, and this is going to be SWIFTCAST, which allows you to cast your next spell instantly, which is almost always going to be revive on a healer. This is a very notable combination because hard casting revive sucks, but in a pinch it can also prevent deaths from even occurring by letting you, say, get off another burst of AoE healing. Maybe you get a cure 2 off on a target while moving. Very handy. Now the final role action is Rescue, and while it might be controversial to say, this is actually an excessively important skill to acknowledge as a skill and keep on your hotbars. I know a lot of healers don't really use it. Get into the habit, especially with a static. Especially since most raiders are technically progression raiders, mistakes happen, you know, snafu. That happens a lot, and this helps you course correct those mistakes by yanking a team member to your side, or alternatively, dragging them off of the edge of the platform. Your choice, really. So this brings us to section 3, which is single target and AoE openers and rotations. So let's go with single target first, like a Savage raid encounter. So I'm making a few assumptions here, like raid cooldown windows are still going to be considered after Dancer's technical step. So that's roughly 5 seconds into the battle starting, or after the 3rd global cooldown. Usually you're going to aim for like the 4th, like really start letting loose. But I am going to be saucy here and apply a pre-pull shield to the tank or party for using it as a Serpent Sting proc that I can ideally use in my opener, the Toxicon ability, or a single target Serpent Sting suspender if that comes to fruition. Especially pre-pull, that first shield costs you nothing to get out, you're not casting anything yet at this point, and the shield gets smashed in seconds. Easiest Serpent Sting proc in the world. At this point, I'm going to pre-cast DOSIS to align with the initial pull. Be careful with 1.5 second cast time because that is definitely a lot faster than what a lot of red mages are used to, because they're going to be casting some of their longer spells at their pre-pull. Currently you're doing like 2.5 second cast time, so definitely acknowledge this and be aware initially when you're getting used to this you might early pull by accident. So what I'm also going to do after that initial cast of DOSIS is that I'm going to do 2 more casts of DOSIS. That's going to bring us up to the 5 second mark. It is expected for raid buffs to really come out along this point, like Ninja's Trick Attack, Dancer's Technical Step, and more. And this is really important, is that the developers have stated that they have paid particular attention to lining up 60 and 120 second big big cooldown cycles, so more than ever, aligning your abilities to this is going to be very fundamental. So Eucrasia is what I'm going to be casting after this third DOSIS cast, which will add another second for buffs to get out, just because Eucrasia costs 1 second. Then I will cast out Eucrasia DOSIS, our powerful damage over time effect. And this is totally something that if I'm wrong, like let me know in the comments. I'm pretty sure I'm right. I have been asking around and people seem to be of the same consensus, but the reason why I'm getting Eucrasia DOSIS right now out is because it's more likely than not that we're going to only lose about 140 potency of Eucrasia DOSIS potency that we will likely make up in spades with raid buffs. I say this because Eucrasia DOSIS does 700 potency and dots snapshot to the buffs that the target has when the dot is applied, or yourself obviously. And it's going to be important to refresh our dots at 30-second intervals to ensure that our second dot is grabbing the raid buffs. So it's like, think that you have Dragoon's Battle Litany on you, you have Dancer's Technical Step, the AoE version, definitely not Dance Partner on yourself, you have like just all these different effects on you, and you want to snapshot those buffs into this dot. So of course, if evidence arises to the contrary, maybe when the raid buff window is starting to close, you want to refresh it, so you initially cast it at the start of the fight and then you refresh it at the end of the raid buff window, might be a thing. So I'm genuinely watching the comments, so please let me know if I am wrong. I'm pretty sure I'm right. I've talked to so many people. This seems correct right now. Most weaves currently are forced early in the fight for like scholars or white mages because of Aether Flow for Scholar. They need to instantly pop that, and Glare is, Broil is not a weave, and then white mages, they want to weave in a size and presence of mind after their Glare, and so they're going to be using the double weave there. So yeah. Point is, I'm open to improvements as always. Anyhow, back to the rotation. So I'm immediately following this up with a cast of Phlegma twice for both charges, just to ensure that we get the most that we can out of the raid buffs into this 510 potency monster of an ability. Now, if TOXICON does get a damage potency boost or single target spender version when Endwalker goes live, I'm going to blow any charges that I have of that during this opener raid buff window. Most likely, it's just going to be one charge because of that initial shield that we applied that should be broken at this point. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit on them for a moment later if it doesn't have an increased potency above DOSIS. So from this point on, it just goes into an upkeep phase where you primarily focus on spamming DOSIS, and then you gain one charge of Phlegma roughly 15 seconds ahead of the 60-second timer burst. Now, how do you keep track of when 60 seconds is coming up? Because the developers, I have said this early in the video, but I cannot restate it enough, the developers stated over and over and over again, 60 seconds, 120 seconds, they have changed the cooldowns to fit in this. The raid buff windows are incredibly important. They always have been, but even in Endwalker, they are becoming more important. Keep always the raid buff window in your mind with your cooldowns, especially since you have big burst skills like Phlegma. So the question now becomes, how do you keep track of when 60 seconds is coming up? Two conditions. First of all, your dot is running out since it's on a 30-second timer. Second one is your dot is on a 30-second indicator, means that you do not have a charge of Phlegma stored up. Both charges are currently used. And now the turnaround. If you have a charge of Phlegma and your dot, or two charges of Phlegma, and your dot is about to expire, you are going to be starting to go into that raid buff window at that exact time. Also, I think that I said it before, but I just want to be very clear that I've said it. Phlegma should almost always exclusively be cast during the raid buff windows to milk that high potency value for everything it's got. I cannot stress this enough. So likewise, in things that could help you keep track of this dot is maybe change your HUD in some way, maybe like the focus target bar, maybe enlarge the debuffs on the target and make it so it only shows yours. Make sure that you keep track of this, especially going into Endwalker. We're starting to talk about the maintenance phase after the opener. And so this really gets into Serpent Sting during the maintenance phase, and so we're talking after the opener's done here, just to be clear to everyone. So Serpent Sting can accumulate 3 charges. This should be a big goal of yours to get charges of Serpent Sting, and then you can blow them during your raid buff window. But again, don't overextend yourself and just start breaking shields just for the hell of it. You want to be using shields when they're actually appropriate, and then really getting all of the value that you can. You want to say that it is kind of hinging on the fact that we have Serpent Sting get a potency buff to make it hit harder than DOSIS does currently. If it doesn't get a potency damage boost when the Sage goes live in Endwalker, then simply sit on the charges until you need to double weave or move a distance that would be impossible during normal slide casting and stagger walking between DOSIS casts. So that would really be the only change from DOSIS in a single target scenario. But really what me and most other people that I'm talking to is working off is off of the presumption that there is going to be a single target Serpent Sting spender commander that deals significant damage, and that is where this should be saved and spent exclusively in raid buff windows, no different than PHLEGMA should be. Again, just to be clear, if that's not the case, save them for when you really need to move or really need to double weave. Now we're talking about AoE. And I cannot emphasize enough. I said it even during my summoner guide, and I still feel this way. For the AoE rotation, it is always so weird to say AoE rotation in dungeons, because dungeons are more of a marathon and things can get really ugly. Someone can take damage that's not expected. It is sometimes cooldowns are up, sometimes they're not. It's a cluster F. But generally speaking, once the tank has a pack of mobs pulled up, I'd rip into PNEUMA for that mitigation, heal and damage, and then blow both charges of PHLEGMA and just go to town with Art of War. DYSCRASIA. Sorry, the scholar in me just leapt out. Now here's where I need to talk about TOXICON again. Yes, that has not left my mind. So I remain highly skeptical that it is intended to be this same potency as DOSIS single target, and even from a large AoE pull size, the same damage as spamming DYSCRASIA. Actually, it's just a touch lower because 50% of 170, 330 is just going to be a touch lower. And so, sure, you have one target take more damage, but we've made the entire Serpent Sting mechanic for that? If anything, I'm expecting, maybe not in the media tour, but for Endwalker, something's gotta change with TOXICON. I do not see this being logical. But anyhow, my point is DYSCRASIA and this are both instant cast, so I'm left feeling this number's off. The only real perk is like you can cast from afar. Is that enough to make an entire mechanic off of Yoshi P? I don't know. Love our depths, but I don't understand. So now we are in section 4, which is general healing approach section, where I'm going to describe how the sage should generally approach healing. Healing is a little messy though, so this is general, and likewise we're going to kind of flow through a flow chart. Since it's extremely similar to the Scholar though, I am morbidly comfortable that this is going to be appropriate and exactly the approach that we're going to see in Endwalker. Whether the media tour reveals the next two skills that we don't really know anything about or not, or whether the Endwalker changes potencies, you're still probably going to follow this exact same flowchart. Maybe with a little bit of a fancy, maybe you can make your AoE crit. Maybe that's what the Zoe ability is doing. Not sure, but like this is pretty much the thing. That being said, we're going to be splitting it into its own sections. First off, background healing, Cardia. Second of all, raw damage mitigation. Third of all, off GCD healing. Fourth of all, barriers. Fifth, on GCD healing, and then we're going to do a wrap up. Did anyone else notice what I did there? I'm setting these up in this order because this should be your priority flowchart from number 1 most important to what you should avoid as much as you possibly can, since that will interfere with your ability to do damage output and proc Cardia. That means background healing, Cardia, raw damage mitigation, off GCD healing, much higher priority for you as a healer than barriers or on GCD healing. And yes, that is ironic to say as you're a barrier healer, but fundamentally the only HP that really matters is the last HP, and barriers should only be used when necessary. I don't think that's controversial to say. Oh my god, I'm gonna get roasted for it. But like, what I'm trying to emphasize here before I get into it is you are a sage. You are not a white mage, you're not an ast, you're not a scholar, you are a bloody sage. You live, breathe, and die by your ability to pump damage. So always do anything and everything that you can healing-wise to make it so that you can stop, or how to say it, that you need to stop DPSing the least that you possibly can. You always want to be DPSing. The first up is background healing, which is specifically Cardia that we have explored like into the depths and back at that mechanic section. And like, as we've described, super flexible, super rewarding. Every damage ability that you do is 170 potency of healing. That is incredible. You should actively be moving it, and say if you have a tank swap in the party between main and off tank, maybe you could even consider swapping it to DPS that just took chip damage, resolve that chip damage, okay, back to the tank, off the GCD with any Cardia weave, which is what, how to say it, since Cardia swapping is off the GCD, it makes it so that this doesn't cost you anything. You don't need to cast GCD heals. So really try and prevent aimless overheal with it, and really resolving chip damage. That's really what is going to be super powerful, because less chip damage means that when AoE damage comes out later, they're not going to potentially die, or maybe it makes it so that your co-healer doesn't need to heal. Basically, it's kind of like literally micromanaging Scholar's Fairy, which is very powerful and has all those perks, but now you're in full control. Actually, that's something that I'm going to introduce right here, is always as a sage, consider, actually as any healer actually, consider the power of your background healing and rotation of targets. This is going to be something even White Mage and Ast can't really do as much without the on GCD heals like regens or that, or Medica 2, or powerful cooldowns that you can very easily resolve as a Sage or Scholar. And that actually comes down to like the point that like when we're talking about healing, let your HOTS do their work. I'm gonna have a lot more to say on that in a second, but really let your HOTS work. So mitigation is second up, and this is something that you should always be thinking about as a Sage or a Scholar, is proactively about your current engagement and your toolbox. We have 3 abilities to provide 10% mitigation. Caracole, which is going to be a barrier plus regen heal tick. Taracole, which is going to be a 10% damage reduction and burst heal, and PNEUMA, which is a massive 10% party-wide mitigation heal and damage spike. And so really powerful. So the point is, if you're approaching a huge raid-wide damage spike, consider dropping Caracole Chole instead of just like taking it raw, and this is going to mitigate damage and then heal off after. Never forget that Caracole